can be done, which may seem minor individually, that can make a big difference collectively. And as I mentioned a couple of times during the presentation, I think much actually lies in the economic geography of new jobs, and the fact that we're seeing this sort of divergence between metropolitan cities, the countryside, and old manufacturing industries, and I think that is what's really sort of tearing apart society. So one example which is close to my heart, because it's close to where I grew up in southern Sweden, is the city of Malmö, which had specialized in building ships. And in the early 1990s, Kockums, the shipyard, closed down, and the city was actually doing very poorly for a long time. And its revival came with the construction of the Öresund Bridge to Copenhagen. So all of a sudden, people in Malmö could stay put, live where housing is cheap, tap into a booming labor market. Most of them would spend their earnings locally where they live, which gave a boost to the local service economy and created a virtuous cycle. And it's actually one of the most dynamic labor markets in Europe now. So I think a lot can be done by actually connecting declining and expanding regions. There's another, I think there's 12 in total policy proposals I got through, so I'll leave the 11 remaining ones as the selling proposition. Thank you for that question.
Yep. Isn't it there on the left? Let's start on the left here. My left.
Thanks for a brilliant talk, really enjoyed it. Whenever these conversations come up, I think about the artisans who were threatened in the Industrial Revolution with the loss of their livelihoods. And yet I would imagine in the room today, and in Oxford particularly, in a very highly affluent place generally, there are a lot of people wearing artisan wristwatches and eating artisan chocolate in something of a rebuttal of the idea that mass-produced goods are best. Do you think that there is some kind of future for things still made by hand, or things made in a bespoke way, that as people get wealthier and living standards become higher, there may be some greater resistance to the idea of mass-produced things or solutions coming from large data sets as opposed to individual tailored ones? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first of all, it's important to note that it's still a very small part of the overall economy, but it is growing. I think the last part you mentioned is absolutely key, which is that you're saying that as we grow richer, we may demand more of that, and I think that's exactly what's happening. But that also means it's not going to be a relief to many of the places that are seeing these adverse consequences of automation, because if you're producing a t-shirt that you're selling for 40 euros, you need to have some people around that are likely to buy them. And one city that the city of Berlin, reason that the city of Berlin is a very attractive place to live, but is essentially bankrupt, is that to produce many of these wonderful things, you actually need a consumer as well in the long run. Otherwise, it doesn't really pay.
Here.
Thank you. You've talked about it almost as a process that has happened since the beginning of capitalism and industrialization, the substitution of dead capital for live labor. What opportunities does this revolution in the way we produce and distribute goods, is it similar to, whether you accept it or not, a Kondratiev cycle with major structural opportunities for new employment, for new activity, particularly with reference to climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's right. I mean, one of the fastest growing occupations today is that one of solar panel installers, right? So there is massive opportunity there. And I think von der Leyen announced a new $1 trillion investment initiative in Europe to spur, well, not just job creation, but combat climate change. And I do think that that is a sector that's likely to expand. That said, though, I mean, many of these new industries don't provide the same sort of broad-based opportunity as the mass production industries of the 20th century did. But they tend to be high-income industries. They support a lot of the incomes of people that provide in-person type of services, so the multiplier is quite high. But broadly speaking, yes, I think that's right.
Okay, hi, thank you for the talk. So my question is, what do you reckon would be the effect of automation on the military? Such as, for example, I intend to develop and mass-produce Android humanoids. What do you reckon would be the effect on the, let's say, the US military and on fifth-generation warfare?
Well, it's a great question. It's not one I spent much time on, to be honest with you. I think was it Alex Levinghouse did a very good report on that for the OMS a couple of years back, and we have some research looking into that. Clearly, there are huge incentives to adopt automation technologies in the military, where the cost of lives is very high. And we know from the past that the military has also been a key driver of innovation in many sectors. So I assume the role of the military is quite significant, but it's nothing I've looked into personally.
Let's just see a show of hands. All right, no women are asking questions for some reason.
There's a lady just there.
All right, why don't you give us the mic chair? Yeah.
You have the on your right. Just there. Yes, thank you.
Carl, thank you for the fascinating talk. I'm 20% into your book on my Kindle. I think technology is the end to the mean, and we are talking about the end, not the mean. We, the human, are responsible for technological progress, and we know and we cannot deny the fact that technology will evolve and it will progress and it will continuously progress. And we're looking at the future of technology, which means I haven't got into your policy section yet. Maybe you have made this recommendation. So what type of policy and what could governments do to look at the future and predict the future and prepare the human race to face this technological progress, and so that we are not trapped in this technological trap, as you call it? So that's my question. Thank you.
Well, that's an easy one. I think one of the key points of the book is actually that technological progress is far from inevitable, and if it was, the Industrial Revolution would have happened a bit earlier in the history of mankind. If it was, every country would have adopted the same technologies to the same extent, and every country would be rich as a consequence of that. But that is not what we see happening over the past 200 years. There's actually been income divergence rather than convergence, which is a bit of a challenge there. So I don't think that it's easy to predict future economic outcomes on the basis of what is happening in technology alone, just because that the mere existence of technology doesn't mean that it's going to be widely adopted. So I think you need to look at different factors and how they interact, and technology is one of them. The distribution of political power in society is one reason that mechanization was adopted on mass scale in Britain first was that the merchant class that grew wealthier also became more politically influential, and they would have nothing that jeopardized their incomes, and mechanization was deemed essential to British competitiveness in trade. Another is that increasingly integrated markets meant that the political power of the craft guilds was significantly eroded because it didn't extend beyond their own city. So you saw this sort of great shift in the balance of political power, and that is sort of one of the reasons that it first happened in Britain. So I think we need to look at all of this as more of a complex system. We have within INET, or part of the Martin School, a group that is doing great work in that domain, and I would encourage you to look at their website.
Person over there, and I think that'll be all we have time for.
So you articulate on a hot topic about attacks on robots, and something that I concern about, that we already see the gap between the frontier of the productivity, the firms on the frontier of the productivity, and the firms that are trying to catch up is increasing. What do you think about this tax? I mean, are you worried that this kind of tax maybe actually even make it harder for firms that trying to catch up to the frontier of technology? It would be more expensive and would be harder for them. And how we could come up with a smart kind of taxation that take to account this problem?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, I think, I mean, in a way, you almost answered it yourself, right? Obviously, if you adopt a robot tax, it becomes more expensive to adopt new technology. So if you're behind the frontier, it gets more expensive to catch up. So there you have it. I mean, I don't really understand why we should single out robots as a source of taxation. I think that's a driver of productivity growth. Things you want to see more of. It's not the things you want to tax. I think we need to think about taxing capital more broadly. Clearly, if you see the labor share of income falling over 4 consecutive decades, you would think that that is going to have certain consequences for public finances, which is being worked on at the Martin School as well, I'm pleased to say. I think maybe even by your group. So clearly that is a very great concern, and I think we need to rebalance sort of tax rates between capital and labor going forward, also to close many of the loopholes that currently exist.
Great. Last person there. And then Carl will be signing books, and you can also speak to him over drinks, which will be even more pleasant than being in a lecture theatre.
Okay. So my question is that you said we've gone through, we've gone through the cycle of new technologies coming in and people being very scared of it before. So my question is that what is one lesson that we're able to draw from the past in terms of actually learning how to deal with these fears that we can apply to today?
So I think one of the key lessons you see from the first industrial revolution is that economic ideas matter, right? And people at the time believed that the world was Malthusian, right? Larger incomes would only result in larger populations with no sort of increase in per capita terms. And as a result of that, any redistribution of income was deemed counterproductive because it would only grow the population. And Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo and the others were very influential in sort of pushing that thought, and they may have been partially right about the history, but they were clearly not right about the time they were living through. That led essentially to the abolishment of the poor laws, which was the only sort of source of relief for people who lost their jobs at the time, and that sort of just exacerbated the social unrest, and we actually know better this time around, and we should use that knowledge.
Great. For those of you that today is the first day at Oxford, do join us for drinks afterwards and celebrate your arrival. For those of you that have been here more regularly, know we don't have drinks after every event. So this is a particular treat today, and it's clearly been a treat to hear Carl. I'm absolutely delighted after having started the group 7 years ago that it's reached the stage of global resonance, and that Carl's produced not only a whole series of great papers with his colleagues, but also this book published by Princeton University Press. This is also the only time you can be able to buy a book that costs £24 something for £15 brand new. So I encourage you to do that, to socialize and to meet with Carl, and thanks to you all for coming.